Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon. And today we have an excellent guest. You will know him, no doubt, from Lotus Eaters, where he worked until very, very recently. And now he has his own YouTube channel, which is Josh Ferme, which is also his name. How convenient. It is, of course, Josh Ferme. How are you doing, Josh?
Thank you very much for having me. I came up with that very imaginative name. It took me a very long time to figure that one out.
Yeah, I like the name. And you've got, we'll talk about it in a minute, but you've got some quite esoteric content on there already. It's already doing quite well. You've got one about cities, how they make us unhappy, which I was watching going, yep. And you've got another one about can you live with half a brain? So this is the route you're going down. But first I want to ask, in obviously a non-gossipy way, because we both love Lotus Eaters, but why did you decide to leave?
So there were multiple different things. There wasn't like any one thing. It was sort of layering over. The first thing is simply that I've been there for a very long time, and I think that I've said a lot of what I wanted to say, and I was worried that I might start repeating myself. And I progressively saw myself as being able to add a bit more value to things in the non-political sphere than in the political one, because covering daily news, the news cycle, covering politics, it's very depressing. And when you're looking at it, you've got to have sort of something to get out of it, albeit, something like understanding or being able to push politics in your direction. But if you don't feel like you're doing that, then it just becomes suffering, undiluted, because you're just confronted with the worst of humanity day in, day out, seemingly for little reason. But no, I'm still going to go back as a contributor, and I still. It's not like I've changed my mind about my politics or anything like that. It's just more that I wanted to go in a more wholesome direction, because I don't just want to be making people mad about um, what they already agree with me on necessarily.
But when you say not having an impact, though, is that how you felt? I'm paraphrasing slightly. You said something like not pushing it in the right direction or something.
Well, I mean that in the sense of I've already said what I wanted to say, and I've said it multiple times. And if I just start repeating myself over and over again, it makes me feel like I'm not actually being productive in pushing boundaries and things like that. I'm just creating it for the sake of it.
Hmm. Yeah, because I suppose the news cycle, our problems don't go away because no one's solving them. So I suppose you would end up repeating yourself because immigration still a problem, unless, of course, Enoch Starmer now fixes it. But yeah, it's the same problems, I suppose, and it is. Yeah, the news cycle is pretty brutal. Is it even possible to be happy while following politics?
I think you've got to be a specific kind of person to be like that. I don't think I'm that kind of person. And there are some people, the political animals as they're known, that thrive in that sort of environment. And I mean, hats off to them. They're very important. They play an important role in sustaining our civilization. And I think also another reason that sort of feeding back into the previous question is that when I started in 2020, there weren't many people in the sphere saying the kind of things I was saying. And now we've come such a long way in the past 5 years, because I started in November 2020, that I feel pretty confident in the people that are out there now. There are people saying the same things that I am. Lots of people, there's very articulate people, there's lots of specialists that we've basically built this network of people that actually know what they're talking about and are good at it, which is reassuring.
Still, kind of like my work here is done, and you're passing on the mantle. I get
Yeah,
that.
that's how I feel about it, is that I'm not necessarily leaving per se. I'm just sort of passing on the baton to someone else who can make their contribution whilst I go into something that I feel like is more beneficial to the world than me saying what I thought for the fifth time about that subject.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It was a very different landscape. I mean, I used to do Lotus pretty early on. Some people have forgotten. Some people remembered from the some of the Lotus fans remember, and that was even before Connor was even there. Just to give you an idea, that was the OG era with you and Callum, and I think Dan was only just about starting or hadn't even started when I was first there. And it was the old office. I do like that era. I like the new era as well because the studio is amazing. But yeah, it was a different time. And what were you doing? I never asked you this. What just before you started there, and how did you end up going there?
So I was doing my master's degree dissertation before I started. So basically, the day after I handed in my dissertation, I was sat with a gin and tonic watching one of Carl's streams, basically celebrating. And I heard him mention, "Oh yeah, I'm starting this new venture. I need a few writers or a writer. If you want to apply to this email," which was Callum's email, um, which I didn't know. And so I just got a reply from, I presumed it'd be some official thing or it'd be Sargon branded. No, it was just someone called Callum replying to me. And fortunately, I'd watched enough of him to know that it was Callum. But yeah, I just, rather than writing out a CV or anything, I just wrote out an email after a few gin and tonics, um, explaining my background in prose because I thought, well, show and don't tell, right? And yeah, so I applied for it the day after I finished my master's dissertation.
And that's a totally normal thing. When you finish a master's dissertation, you have a gin and tonic and watch a Carl Sargon stream. That's a completely normal
I couldn't
celebration.
switch off, all right? I needed to feel like I was doing something productive. I was working like 80-hour weeks on that thing for months. You can't just switch off and then do nothing.
Right. No, you're right. It's like those athletes whose heart rate gets very low, and if they stop training, they'll die. You had to still get some content in there. What was your? Just remind me. I know it was some sort of area of psychology, but what was your master's on?
So I looked at the self-other differences in decision making between the advice people give and the actual actions they take. So basically, I was testing whether um, the advice people give, and I did it specifically on people asking for advice applying for university because I was recruiting a student population, and you don't ask advice from people who haven't done something before because that's usually bad advice. And so I figured that, well, most people seek out someone who's got experience or expertise in something. And so I'll look at that. And I was able to quantify only about a 2% difference between the advice they gave to other people and the actual actions they themselves took, which is quite interesting that had never been done before.
Hmm. So that's interesting. Yeah. So is that the kind of thing you'll be doing? Not necessarily literally that, but you're going to be doing like more like research, actual data stuff now.
I think I'm going to do that in the political sphere, maybe find a position in a think tank, something like that, because I've got all of those qualifications and I'm just not using them. And I feel like that would be helpful because one thing I did really enjoy, and now this could get me in trouble, I liked going through the crime data and going by either race or ethnicity and just creating new stats based on the government crime data and posting them online. And now I see like my stats going around saying, "Oh yeah, Albanians are 32%, 32 times overrepresented in prison." And now I see people using that out in the wild, and it's great. It's like raising a child and releasing it into the wild, and you see them thriving.
But
Some of
your
my
child is
London,
Albanian crime data. Oh,
yes, my children are racial crime stats.
that's hilarious. Go and thrive in the world. 1 in 50 Albanians is in prison. It's something like that, isn't it? 1 in 50, something like that.
It's absurd, yeah. I think,
Wow.
what's it, like 1.4% of the prison population is Albanian, and they're like 0.05% or something. This is all off the top of my head.
You better hope the Albanians don't find you. There's like pictures of you in Albanian jail cells where they're throwing darts at your face because, like, this is the guy. That's a strange. That is, but it is important work. I mean, you're right. I mean, look, I'm a mere song and dance man. I come from comedy. I'm an entertainer. I don't know anything, but you're sort of more on the actual knowledge side. Stats, they go over my head. I did English literature, so that is important work. Um, One thing I wanted to ask you, because you are sort of quite young, even though you seem like you could easily be in a sort of 1940s movie. I always
Thank
think
you. That's a
you're
big compliment.
yeah, because you got the hair, your suits and stuff. It's just something about you. But you're like young, aren't you? Like a Gen Z person.
I'm 29,
Okay,
30 this year,
okay. So
getting
youngish. All right.
old.
Still, I call it young. But so did you ever know a time before politics consumed everything?
Um, I think it was just that I didn't perceive it. So I studied politics at school when I was 17, I think. I did an A level in it. And so that was sort of my political awakening. And before that, I didn't really know what politics was because, I came from a household of, you know, sort of a middle class Daily Mail reading household, which is confusing. I thought that politics was just whinging about people on benefits, and that was it.
Kind of is. I mean, you're still
It's
doing it.
not.
You're doing an advanced version of that on Lotus Eaters, but it's
Mhm.
ultimately the same. Some of those social housing breakdowns and benefit breakdowns. But yeah, okay. So you came from that household, you didn't know, but because I'm from a time where politics didn't dominate because we'd kind of it seemed like it was settled in the Fukuyama sense. We'd won. There was
End of
prosperity,
history. Yeah.
end of history. Yeah, because nothing was really happening, and it turned out to be a great thing. You had like grunge music or something, and people like rebelling, but the rebellions were kind of quite silly and fairly pantomimic. And then you had Britpop, and there was this kind of weird. Um, I grew up with Britpop and the kind of weird optimism. Call it. It's kind of postmodern and fake in a way, but it was kind of an optimistic time, largely to do with the economy pre 9/11. Then we had 9/11, and that was kind of defining for my generation. But pre 2008 crash, so it was just a different. It now seems like halcyon days. Of course, it was liberalism and so on, but I don't know. There just wasn't the same. Things hadn't collapsed anywhere near the same degree, so you could ignore politics, which was a kind of a privilege. It turns out, and now politics is kind of, in my view, sort of shunted itself into all aspects of life. So you can't just have comedians; they have to be woke, and you can't just have bands; they have to say, "Yes, I support." Kneecap saying kill politicians or whatever. Everything's completely politicized, but it was a time when it wasn't. But I just thought at your age, I wonder if you ever knew a time where everything wasn't saturated by politics.
I suppose my my time away from politics is just the areas where it didn't consume yet. So there were lots of areas where politics hadn't yet sort of encroached upon pre sort of 2015. But at the same time, now we're further along 10 years later from that. You can also look back and see politics where you didn't normally see it before. Like watching old films from like the 80s or 90s, the political messaging now is so very obvious
True.
that um, it's more that I was blind to it than it wasn't there. Sort
Yeah,
of
that's a
like
good
They
point.
Live, right? I put on the glasses, now I can
Yeah,
see all the aliens.
that's a good point. I watch these old, like, they're still good movies, like A Few Good Men, but the liberal bias is so clear. And my thing is, you just watch them and support the baddie. So in that one, you support Jack Nicholson, and you can watch Dead Poet Society, and you're against Robin Williams because he's a liberal subverting it. You know what I mean? So if you just always support the baddie, you can sort of watch them again like that. But you're right, the programming was all there, but it was less obnoxious. And less, yeah, dominant. But okay, I was just wondering. So, by the way, can I just ask what the best thing you did in your time at Lotus was, in your opinion?
Um, well, I did quite a lot. I did have a series which ran for 171 episodes, which was sort of academic level stuff, and I had to present it every week. Being able to keep that up for 171 weeks unbroken is quite something, because
Mm.
that was a lot of work, and I'm very proud of a lot of the stuff I put out there. And that's all on the website now,
Yeah, so
so it's
that's all
still
going to
there.
stay up. I was actually looking for it today and couldn't find it, which is annoying. It's contemplations, right?
That's right.
But for
Yeah,
some reason I couldn't find it. I was only searching on my phone, so that's weird. Maybe you fix it so
it's
that
been, they've tried
boomers
to
could
hide
find
it
it.
so people forget me.
I think that's what they've
No,
done
I'm
already.
joking.
They're already erasing you from history. Um, One of the things I remember was you interviewing. Just I know this is kind of like a weird, like greatest hits of Josh, but I remember you interviewing the Jan 6 prisoner. I thought was pretty cool. That was
I
pretty.
spoke to him a few times. I went on his podcast recently. So now he's out of prison. He's actually running for a Senate seat in Florida and has his own podcast.
I didn't realize that. What's his name again?
Jake Lang.
Yeah, because he has sort of two names and it's confusing. He has a
It's his middle name is
yeah,
also a first name.
yeah. I thought that was really cool. That even this guy was in jail, and you were managing to get an interview with him. I thought that was like important work to be doing at the time.
Yeah, it was good because I did loads of work on Jan 6th. I know after the day after it happened, we created a timeline of all of the events, and it was like accurate down to a minute. And whilst all of the mainstream media were sort of struggling to make sense of it, we were just like, here's what happened, here's how it happened, here are all the sources, and we never had to change it or update it because it stayed accurate. And we also had a photographer on the ground on January 6th as well. And we got loads of interesting photos, loads of unique things that no one else saw, which I'm very glad the intelligence agencies didn't pick up on, because I would probably be interrogated for that. But
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine
thankfully,
how
they ignored me.
I might get interrogated for this. But it's completely changed, doesn't it? Because Trump's released everyone. It's so interesting how power has shifted there. It's kind of classic elite theory. Has your politics changed? Because you were kind of a libertarian in the past. I don't know if you still are.
I am, but also anyone who hears that word is going to presume I believe things that I don't now. So my libertarianism is more, it's not for a love of freedom, it's for a hatred of dependence. And it's just more that I like the idea of being self-sufficient. I don't want to have to rely on anyone. And everyone's just like, well, if you don't do something, the state will come after you. But I'm of the opinion that libertarianism is for once we've won the argument. And it's also Anglo-specific. Like, it could work in Britain. I don't think it could work in Sri Lanka or, I don't know, Iran. I think that we've got a sort of more liberty oriented culture where it could work. And you basically need a very conscientious, moral society to do that. And I think we're capable of it, because even in the modern day, even though the morality is still a little bit twisted, we are still occupied by moral questions as a civilization, more so than most others. So there's this sort of underlying latent concern. And I think that that's how these sorts of things could work. But my sort of libertarian instincts is just trim down the size of the state, and it limits how much your enemies can do to you. And as long as you control the apparatus and defeat their arguments, they're not going to be around to take over. But I'm all for using power to win.
Hmm.
So I'm not necessarily against that. It's just more that I see the sustainable ends as, well, you win, you implement your agenda, then you cut away, you burn away all of the apparatus of the state. So if you do come out of power, then it's very difficult for another party to come in and undo all of your work, because they've got to create these government departments and then repeal the legislation. So in the push and pull of politics, it's the best way to cement your legacy.
Interesting. Is there a kind of reverse of that happening now? With you sort of always hear that where, or what if they get in and do it? They've already been doing. Let's say Trump in America, they've already been doing all this lawfare against him, and then whenever Trump is about to do something kind of based, everyone goes, "Oh, but what about the other side?" The conservatives go, "What about the other side?" And you go, That's never worked though, because they're doing it to us anyway." So, but you're sort of talking about once you win, you then unpick it. But yeah, maybe you'd have to win in some kind of very permanent way there, though, wouldn't you?
It's almost, I view it almost like in communism, how they say the state will wither away. Maybe it'll never happen, but it's just about, is there any meaningful resistance to you? Are you gonna, because no one can keep power no matter what the political system is forever. And it was just my thinking that if you have this resounding victory, implement what you want and then pull the rug away, at least you can preserve it for as long as possible,
Interesting.
is my thinking.
So it's not the kind of libertarianism of drugs being legal and so on that people think about.
No, I think particularly some of the bad ones should still be illegal.
Yeah,
Heroin
because
and the
that's what
likes.
people
I
when
don't think
they.
there's any good reason to be doing heroin.
No, I
You at
agree.
home, if you're watching this about to shoot up,
Yeah,
don't do that.
don't do it. And you think it would only work in Britain? Isn't? Are there so many things like that now? I mean, I tend to think things like free speech, all these ideas. They're like, yes, they worked with because it was Britain, but they don't work with multiculturalism, because then suddenly everyone's got you end up with a more Singapore society because everyone's got their own religion, everyone's got different ideas of free speech. So you end up. Someone was saying it to me that we have a similar demographic situation to Singapore, and that they have 76% Chinese. We have something like 76%, uh, white British, whatever you want to call it. So we have a lot more different types of people. They just have Indian and Malay. But the point that this guy was making was therefore you end up with an authoritarian kind of culture where things have to be regulated, like free speech, religious
I
tolerance, and all this.
I thought it was a given that they're going back, Nick. I'm sorry. It's just part of my overall approach to politics. That yeah, that's obviously day one. We're doing stuff about that.
I see.
So
I
that
see.
I'm thinking of liberty for the Anglo. You know, back when we're a lot more monocultural.
Right. Yeah, because things. Yeah, I know. In your theory, you are. Yeah, that's just where we are now. Do you think it's inevitable that multicultural societies do get quite authoritarian? Though, for example, the Lib Dems. I think the law already existed, but the Lib Dems are like fining people for noise on public transport, or now Starmer's going to fine people for defacing Winston Churchill, which we would probably never dream of. But it's because some lefty just up oil people would do it, but mainly people like my generation would never think of doing it because my
I don't
grandfather
know.
fought in World War II.
I've got a personal beef with Winston Churchill. He played a hand in almost killing my grandfather, so I'm not
Really?
a big fan of the guy. He was on the HMS Repulse that sunk near Singapore, and they got sent out there in World War II without any air support, and then the Japanese targeted them. It was just the Prince of Wales and the Repulse, I think, and they both sunk because they were just sent out into the Pacific with no support at all, which was one of Churchill's directives and was foolish, and people advised against it at the time.
Right. So you actually would deface Churchill. You're that rare person. Of course, there is a right wing critique of Churchill as well, but I just don't see them as the kind of people defacing statues.
Well, I'm not going to deface
Pat
any statues
Buchanan's
it
not up
doesn't
there.
achieve.
Right.
Yeah, don't see him defacing statues, no.
That's what I mean. So you tend to end up with laws for things that didn't need laws. That's all I'm really saying.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think that um, that's the whole point of authoritarianism, isn't it? To try and get everyone to do things in a specific way. It's enforcing a sort of code of conduct for the citizenry, and when you've already got that done socially, as we had in Britain before, where we had sort of standards of manners and politeness and etiquette and ways of doing things that you didn't need the state to step in because people were able to figure things out for themselves, which I think as a general principle is desirable because when people figure things out for themselves, generally speaking, their lives are better put together for it because they have more agency over it and therefore they feel more responsible. And when they feel more responsible, they make better decisions about their own life. If you're basically treating the state like your foster parents, then you're not going to live a good life.
Right. Yeah. And those things build up over time, those high trust things, very hard to impose them in a top down fashion.
The
Yeah.
good thing is, though, that they still exist in rural parts of Britain. Like we've got these sort of well springs of British culture all around in the countryside. I'm not going to tell Serco where they are, but they're around and about the country, and so were circumstances to change, these could slowly encroach back on the country again. So I'm not particularly cynical about that sort of thing going away forever, because I think it's also so ingrained into our psyches that it'd be very difficult to get rid of, even if we wanted to.
That's very interesting. The bleak version of that is my sort of speculation when I watched actually Callum's documentary. You know, Callum's capable of making a fairly bleak documentary, and I was watching it, and I ended up thinking English people will just end up in little rural reservations with like passing around the same fiver around the two chip shops. I could just see it happening. I was watching that. I was like, the kind of
Going to open
apocalyptic.
our own casinos as well, perhaps.
Yeah, that was my kind of apocalyptic vision of it. But your vision is the flip side of that, which is these things that are inherent to us will never go away, and we'll bring them back. That's interesting. It's definitely very different. And I grew up in a very rural area, the lakes in the north, so a completely different world. I mean, Carl always says he didn't grow up in a Christian society. I always think I actually did because very Christian place, and we sung hymns every morning, and we said the Lord's Prayer every day. We went across to the church, across from the school, and I just think it was like going a completely different era because because it was rural and because it was the north. So I see what I mean. In these pockets of England, my dad's from sort of Lincolnshire. I was up there for my grandma's funeral. That seemed like a completely different world, far removed. Rural Lincolnshire seems like an ancient England.
I also think that these sorts of things, even if you're not following politics, you just have a vibe from a place, don't you? There's an atmosphere to it, and
Yeah.
these places have an innate pull to them that even people outside our culture can recognise. I saw people discussing Bourton on the Water recently in the Cotswolds, and I went there, and it was jam packed full of Indian and Chinese tourists. But not only does that speak of the fact that, we've got people from abroad ruining our nice quaint towns, but also that they can recognise that it's a desirable and beautiful place. And so it speaks to something objective there, which should be reassuring, because if there's objectivity to the quaintness of England, then it means that there's something tangible we can point to and say, this is what we want. This is the direction we want to go in. Look at how much nicer it is. And you can just pose it as, would you rather live in London? Would you rather live in a nice rural town in England? If you were to ask a native British person today, they would almost certainly pick the latter, wouldn't they?
Yes, it's. I mean, of course, Sadiq Khan sees all that and just says that's green belt to build on. That's always the argument. Why can't we build on all this? I'm like, because that's the country. This is the good bit. Like, but they just want to build on it all. You're right about tourists. We apparently, where I'm from, we have Rydal Caves, and apparently that's now a big. Used to just be where I would walk next near my house, but now it's a TikTok site. So it's been on TikTok. So now you just have apparently people there every day from TikTok. I haven't been back for a while. It sounds hellish to me, but apparently it's just dominated by TikTok tourists now, which
That's the
is
worst kind by the sounds of it as
the
well.
absolute worst. Yeah, it's horrific. That just thinking about that it freaks me out. But yes, that's interesting. There's the inherent value to these places, and just on the city. Actually, that ties in with your YouTube video about cities. I was watching that thinking, yeah, I always want to go back home, but it is very impractical, isn't it? I know I'm going all over the place here, but it's impractical because you just think, how can I do it? So someone like me, particularly, I don't like driving. I don't have a car anymore. I'm so used to the city. It's ultra convenient. I'm living the atomized liberal city life in every sense, completely selfish, no dependence. It's disgusting how sort of I'm the ultimate bug man in a way. In a way, in a way, I'm like living the ultimate liberal life they want, while completely saying in all my rhetoric that it's awful. But I'm from a very different place, so I always want to go back in my heart, but it's impossible
That's
logistically.
that just speaks of how pernicious it is, really, because if you're to ever question someone about, if you could have everything you wanted, how would your life look? It rarely sounds like, oh yeah, I would stay living in a major city and continue my atomized existence. No one ever says that. They talk about moving out to the country and starting a family, or moving their family out to the country and having a more wholesome existence, more in keeping with the natural world, as I said in that video, actually.
Yeah, and that video did make me think about it. You prove that people actually just are unhappier in cities, essentially, with data.
Hmm.
I was like, yeah. I mean, intuitively we know that, but there's actual data on it. Um, and do you also think Sam Bidwell wrote a piece about this? That how the English actually, it's so inherent to us to have our home and our patch of land, and obviously the housing crisis has robbed, to some degree, me of it, but especially your generation and younger, has robbed people of that. Is there something inherent to, apparently what we did was we always migrated within England though and Britain, not to other countries, to look for work. We left home earlier than most cultures, and we moved and looked for work in economic centers. So in a way cities are natural to us, but then we tried to get our patch of land and build something and have our own home. Is that sort of a key thing for English people?
I think so. I think the healthiest way to approach it is, I don't deny that cities are important. Like, I've got quite a detailed um, sort of theory of how economies work, and it's obviously important to have them as an economic hub because it just makes everything more efficient to have it in one place. But what you've got to have is the option for someone who works in one of these cities doing one of those jobs that is basically essential. You can't deny that. You've got to give them the option to own land elsewhere. I see it as almost comparable to ancient Rome in a way, where all of the soldiers were promised their own little patch of farmland, and when that wasn't provided, that was the periods of time when Rome was, most unstable, closest to civil war. Is that they felt like there wasn't uh, a place for them, even though they've put the work in. That's how you create resentment and an instability. And I think that that's the most desirable situation, whereby working people can have this if they want to, just allow them to make the choice. But I think the heart of England is in the countryside. And if we want to continue all of the things that we like about our culture, we need to preserve a healthy rural environment. Ideally, a situation where you can do as much work, economically productive work, outside of a city as possible, but you'll still need them and they're still important. I think people are more inclined to move there when they're young and move out when they're older.
Yeah, well, that's clear. And that was your cities video. Then you did one about whether a person can survive with half a brain. This was quite esoteric. I'm asking because this is where you're going now with your YouTube channel. But so, what is it going to be? The common thread of your channel, just stuff that you're interested in, because it's so those things are quite disparate. Cities making you unhappy, and can a person survive with half a brain?
Well, my thinking is that in the modern day, we've sort of lost
And that
the
video wasn't
drive.
about Emily Maitlis, by the way, just in case anyone wants to come in with some sort of joke like that.
Well,
Sorry.
the funny thing is, in the actual example in the video, the first person I bring up is a French civil servant who's missing 90% of his brain matter,
Yes.
which, the jokes write themselves, don't they?
Yeah.
Civil servant, only 10% of his brain left, still has a normal job
Normal
and
life. He
family.
didn't
Yeah.
notice. Yeah. So anyway, carry on. But
But
your
my,
channel.
my thinking is that people don't approach the world like a 19th century polymath anymore, and that upsets me. I think that people seem to think that because the economy demands that you have your special niche that you know about, that you don't deviate from your little reservation of intellect, that that's the most desirable thing. But actually, you need to know a lot of things about a wide variety of subjects to really have a true understanding of the world, and everything connects to a certain degree. Because you could argue that video looking at how people are living with half a brain, that tells you a lot about yourself and how your brain works, and how it teaches you about metacognition, how to think about your own thinking as well. Because I go into the concept of neuroplasticity, and how your brain can adapt, and the importance of habituating certain things that you want to get better at, because that's how the neural pathways are formed. And so there's actually a very important lesson embedded into this otherwise quite entertaining abstract thing, that it's teaching people neuroscience, but through a vehicle of, look at this idiot with half a brain.
Yeah, interesting. And so you're absolutely right about the polymath thing. It's very hard these days. There used to be a thing. I can't remember who was like the last person to have read every book, but it was a time when you could have read every book. And obviously, you have all these people like Da Vinci, and all. It was normal to be a polymath. And then we became very specialized, and that's part of the atomization in a way. And it comes from industrialization. It comes from like the conveyor belt type mentality. I sort of understand all that broadly. So you're trying to bring people back to being polymaths or thinking like that.
There's something to be of benefit in all of the different disciplines, and I think it's also just that I've got lots of disparate interests myself, and I see value in cultivating it. I've got it. I might be a psychologist, but I'm really interested in history and uh, human evolution and biology, aspects of chemistry and physics, and exploring space. I think to be a healthy person, you've got to have uh, multiple different avenues of interest. If you're too monodimensional, it it sort of hobbles you in a way in dealing with the world, because there are massive areas where you don't know how they work, and usually uncertainty breeds anxiety, which breeds bad decisions, and you don't want that in your life.
That's interesting. Yeah, struggled to find a way to incorporate all my interests because I have an MA in literature, and my interest was always fiction. Now it doesn't really come up because we're in this very political world, and it doesn't seem that useful. I'm kind of wishing I'd read all John Locke instead, but I'd read all this fiction
But
like
all
Dostoevsky.
political rhetoric and much of politics more generally is the art of storytelling, isn't it? It's you're basically pushing a narrative or a version of events that perhaps suits the individual saying it, but it's still a story. So understanding how those are composed is still very valuable. There's always a way in which you can create a thread between whatever it is you've specialized in and something else.
Maybe I was specializing in sort of like post-war American literature and postmodern literature, which is like so leftist in its assumptions. The problem I had, many people had this, was by the time I got to university, it was literature had been completely hijacked by leftism. It was all about post-structuralism, post-colonialism, and it was like, let's study Akabe dismantling Conrad's Heart of Darkness rather than Heart of Darkness. And we never actually got to do the canon. Even at school, we didn't get to do, even though I'm from the home of Wordsworth, we didn't get to do Wordsworth. We did 6 women poets who were just sort of rubbish contemporary women going through the menopause. And you sort of like, why didn't we get to do the canon? I always instinctively hated it before I understood it. So I was always leaning towards, why aren't we doing these greats? And I got to a bit of romantic poetry, so we got to do Shelley and things like that, which was great. But we got all this deconstruction, Roland Barthes, Death of the Author. You got all this Jacques Derrida, all this rubbish. Well, we didn't actually ever get to do the canon. It was so frustrating to me. We were deconstructing something we never even got to construct. And I think about things I wrote, and I understood inherently that I didn't like all of this, but couldn't quite. I was sort of, instinctively articulate it without knowing all the terms and why I didn't like it.
Well, the problem with a lot of this postmodern commentary, although I do concede that postmodernism can be useful sometimes, is that most people engage in art and literature and the arts more generally because it provides their life with meaning. And if you read the meaning out and just look at what's this trying to say, what's the message of this, it's sort of reducing a piece of art down to its political or social messaging rather than how does this make me feel? How does this affect how I view my place in the world? Which I think most people approach these sorts of things with that in mind, even if it's not consciously, it'll be in the back of their mind and why they enjoy it in the first place.
That's exactly it. And that's why my favorites were always Dostoevsky, Knut Hamsun, Hermann Hesse, Thomas Bernhard, who no one's heard of. And the good thing we did get to was classic American literature. So we got Melville, got to read Moby Dick, which is an insanely massive book, which everyone should read but doesn't have the time. So yes, that's exactly it. And I realized later, and then there's Welbeck now, and I realized the thread was always that these are the philosophical novelists, and that's what it's a kind of mix of fiction and questioning and existential questions. That's what interested me. You're right. Do you think I wanted to actually, I know this is completely random, but you're a psychology guy. Is politics downstream of psychology?
I would say that it's an intermediary factor. So I'm going to say something that some people might find controversial, but the scientific literature is pretty resounding on this fact that biology shapes your personality shapes your politics, and therefore it's safe to say that there is a strong biological component to your political beliefs because it's determined by your personality, which is largely heritable because you know your nature is determined by your genes to a significant degree. People, because it's is not visible, people don't give it as much explanatory power as it should have. But if you read some of the research, it's just like, okay, in some areas, this is the factor. It's like 70% of the phenomena is that. Sure, the environment's important, but also um, most people are raised by their birth parents who then reinforce the genetic component because they raise you in a way that is similar because they're determined by their genes that they passed on to you, and so it's like a double reinforcement for most people. And so I think it's why when people get past a certain age, your politics don't really change. Past about the age of 25, which also happens to be around the time when the brain starts being less neuroplastic, you're sort of stuck in your ways to a certain degree. It's very rare to get a flip in the 30s or the 40s or even later than that.
I mean, not to sort of do the anecdotal counter, but I certainly have changed a lot. But I just argued against that by saying I was always the same even at university. But I didn't. So what's happened is really I've understood it more as time's gone on, probably more accurate rather
Well,
than
you have feelings
yeah.
about how the world should be, and it's just about looking at the explanations available to you and finding the one that fits it best. That's sort of how most people approach politics. And when I was younger, I was frustrated at what I've now come to realize is more sort of globalist neoliberal types. And I thought that this was some sort of unfairness in the economic system, sort of coming at it from a more left wing perspective. But no, even now I'm very strongly in favor of free markets. I still have that same perception of unfairness, and it seems to be something that's innate. It's not really changed, even though my understanding of politics over the past so many years has changed quite a bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. For me, yeah, I realized I would kind of was set probably even at school because I hated things like pandering to the lowest common denominator. And we had a thing where we only six of us passed this modular exam. So for the next part of the term, we just had to sit around doing nothing, and they all resat it, and we were kind of left to do nothing. And it was always pandering to the, and I always hated the absence of the grammar schools, which sort of got my dad out of his background of being poor and working class to do a bit better. And then they got rid of the grammar schools. And I always think people like me would have benefited from them because I got very high A level grades, but didn't get. No one said go to Oxford or do anything like that. So I was always inherently furious about kind of a leftist equality kind of equality type thinking. Basically,
I actually think that was my window into politics more than anything, is that I remember starting in year 7. This is secondary school or high school if you're American. Um, at, at age 11 and being frustrated at people in my class that couldn't read. And I remember taking a test at 11 to figure out your sort of reading competence. And I had the reading competence at 11. This isn't like some sort of humble brag. It's just that my parents uh, put in a lot of effort to make me literate. I had the reading age of a 21-year-old at 11, so like a university graduate. And I had to share a class with people that couldn't string a sentence together. So it's like, how is that fair? How's that equivalent? And that was sort of my introduction into how the way things work can be innately unfair and people will defend them. Because I remember saying this to my teachers and they're like, well, it's not fair on the other kids. And I'm like, well, it's not fair on me. And let's be honest, I'm going to do more than they will. They're going to be bashing rocks together after they leave here. So why don't we put all our eggs into, a different basket instead?
and that's something that certainly people like Bowden said was what defines whether you're on the right is that you don't believe in inequality. People are scared to say this, but inequality, people are naturally unequal in all sorts of ways. Some people are much taller than me, some people are smarter, etc. We can go into it, but therefore, to impose equality implies a lack of freedom. It has to be imposed. You weren't allowed to go off and just do what you wanted and read 21-year-old books. You had to stay down with the idiots. And so that was an imposed. It was an imposed restriction on you. It was inherently unfair. It ruined your freedom. It damaged your potential. Probably, I certainly feel like that being at a state school massively damaged what I could have
Yeah, I
done.
was at a state school, yeah.
They're garbage. I mean, if we'd had the grammar schools, we'd have been flying because that was a one generation where you had general social mobility. Maybe it does make me sound like a lefty, but you were able to go. People like Melvin Bragg, Dennis Potter, they could go to grammar schools, be working class, and actually get out of it if they wanted, and
The thing
they
is, I
took
had
that
the
away.
option to do it as well. I just didn't want to have to get the bus for like
See, now that's
45
on you
minutes.
again because that's
I
back to
know, yeah.
you just being lazy. That's what it was. The bus,
Well, I
hilarious.
also lived about a 2-minute walk from the closest secondary school. So it's just like, well, this would just be stupid. Do I get the bus for 45 minutes or do I go 2 minutes down the road?
Right, you were optimizing, but you may not have been optimizing for the right thing.
Well, you do learn things from a comprehensive that you wouldn't learn otherwise. And most of it's, you know, near do well stuff. But I think it's also important to be able to talk to people from different backgrounds. I never would have come into contact with some of the people I did at school in my everyday life because they live so very different lives from me. Let's just say that.
Yeah, you learn how to call someone gay and how to fight and and all these things. Yeah, I mean, you could
It
call those
also is
skills.
really good because there's a sort of I don't really want to call it a bucket of crabs mentality because you're not necessarily tearing people down, but there's a very clear hierarchy in a comprehensive secondary school. And I think that that's good because it teaches you um, that there is a way of being that is right. And the bullying and the teasing, as unpleasant as it might be in the moment, is pushing you towards pursuing that goal because you want to get rid of the horrible feeling and be liked and well regarded and have your head screwed on.
Well, yeah, but is it a valid hierarchy? Yes, there may be things like not bragging or something, but there's also things like drinking, being good at football. The hierarchy didn't seem a just one at my school.
Yeah, but I think also they're proxies for other things, aren't they? Being good at football is basically a proxy for physical fitness, which putting my evolutionary psychological cap on, it's similar to why adults dance in a club. You're signaling to other people your fitness for sexual selection, aren't you? Is that sort of notion? You're doing something physical that signals to other people that listen, I've got it sorted. I'm not like those uh, uncoordinated losers over there. I'm better than them. So it's a sort of status thing in a way, but then a
Mhm.
lot of things we do are. And of course, there's other components to it as well. That's not the only aspect of it. Football's also fun to play, and it's good to have competition, and you'll have friends on the team that hanging out with is fun. So there's lots of other reasons to do it, but that's just an aspect of it.
Well, I still play football once a week, five-a-side, so I'm not. That's one example that just sprung to mind. But they completely missed out the even taking your evolutionary argument, the factor of being smart. I mean, that was frowned upon. So people call me like Dixon, you brainy bastard, was one comment, or the teachers themselves would not want to give you a high predicted grade and all this. Had to argue with them that I got much higher grades than they claimed because they didn't want to be judged externally or whatever it is. So the point is, why was that missing? Maybe it was different at your school. At my school, to do well, you had to. If you were smart, you had to hide it, and to try at all was frowned upon, and to do well was frowned upon, except in narrow fields like sport.
I think there was a strategy that you had to follow if you were intelligent in school. It's it's basically like if you had lots of money, you don't go around showing it off. You're not flashy with it. You keep it to yourself and mind your own business. And a
Right.
lot of the time, I think people would rather have good grades than bad grades. It wasn't like they were proud of being stupid. People still um, weighed themselves based on how well people were doing. But I think you've just got to do it in a tactful way. Like I would still raise my hand in school, but it'd only be like after a short while, no one's answering. Oh, put us out of our misery. Here you go.
Yeah, it's funny. I would deliberately break down my words into smaller words and speak in less coherent sentences and stuff like that deliberately, because otherwise you just get the piss taken out of you. I don't know what that's done to me. And I got a very high. So I sometimes talk about it because it's kind of funny to go on about it. But I got the third highest grade in the country on the history A level syllabus. But then a girl in the class also did incredibly well, and people laughed at me getting it when they people literally laughed out loud that I got it because I'd played this game fairly well of hiding. Whereas with her, I said, "But hang on, she did basically the same," and they went, "Oh yeah, but she's a swat." So like it wasn't even. Of course, she did well. No one cared. Yeah, but so I'd done some of that game, did it reasonably well. I don't know if that sets you up. You think it gives you good qualities? I think it gives you terrible qualities for the world. And I think we get beaten by these posh shows and these public school people and the old grammar school people did much better. And I don't
Yeah,
know.
but the one thing you can do from a comprehensive that the poshos that went to a private school can't do is the sort of juvenile banter that you can just have no response to. And, you can, there's a sort of, muscling them out approach to it. I don't know what it
They
is.
can't do
It's sort of a
bands.
feeling. Yeah. Normally they're, I've encountered some privately educated, aristocratic types. They're obviously smarter than me, but there's an essence that is missing. It all feels very manufactured, and all of your life has been towards this end goal. And there's a sort of living in the moment and fun lovingness, I think, that some people from a comprehensive might have, that you get from slacking off and having a bit of fun with your mates. I think that's still important. At the end of the day, you're still a child. You've got to do those sorts of things.
Lads, bands. Yeah, you're right. Those people, they're barely people. I agree with you. I've changed my mind. I got in a sidetrack there, but do you think, so you say biology dictates personality, which dictates politics. Given that, is the whole left versus right thing kind of a nonsense? Is one just born to have a higher, let's say, disgust instinct, and therefore you're on the right, or you have it more worried about harm, and therefore you're on the left, whatever it is? And these things it's a pointless battle because it is just divided. God in His infinite wisdom has made some people naturally one way and some people the other.
Yeah, there's lots of different things that differentiate how people approach politics. So,
all right, that is the end of the free episode. But if you want the full podcast, go to nickdixon.net for all the extra content, all my articles. That is my Substack, nickdixon.net. And we need your help to keep this whole thing going, keep the lights on, this amazing production, hiring people, etc. nickdixon.net to support us. It's £5 a month, which is about the cost of some sort of fancy latte in London, or as a slight discount if you get the yearly option, or it's just £5 a month. So we'll see you on nickdixon.net, and thank you very much.